Behind the New York Public Library, at the southeast end of Bryant Park, lies the statue of a polymath, a lawyer who left his cushy law practice for New York City to make money as a poet. The William Cullen Bryant Memorial is one of many portrait monuments in New York City. However, its grandeur sets it apart from the rest of the series. The towering 30-foot-tall canopy, ornate arch, detailed bronze cast, and surrounding marble urns of the Bryant Monument showcase the respect and adoration important citizens of New York had for the late Bryant. William Cullen Bryant worked as an editor for the New York Post and wrote poetry. As an avid supporter of the establishment of Central Park, he used his position at the Post to gather support for the founding of that famous reserve in the middle of Manhattan. It was Bryant who most often addressed the crowds at the unveiling of the statues and the monuments in the park. As a matter of fact, his death resulted from complications after a fall suffered during ceremonies in the park honoring Giuseppe Mazzini. One might wonder, why wasn't his memorial in Central Park? Bryant was a founding member of the Century Association. The private club was formed to encourage interest in literature and the fine arts. On his 70th birthday in 1864, the club commissioned artist Launt Thompson to sculpt a bronze bust of Bryant. The association presented the bust to the Park Commission to be placed in Central Park, but its placement was denied. The commission had earlier resolved that no bust or statue of a living person would be erected in the park. Ironically, this was a decision based on a precedent set when Boss Tweed of Tammany Hall was trying to get a statue of himself built in Central Park. Bryant published lots of slandering articles about the corruption at Tammany Hall and publicly celebrated the commissioner's decision to block the building of said monument. A decade later, the Century Association was frustrated that the valuable bust wasn't on public display, and with Bryant now celebrating his 80th birthday, the club suggested the bust be put in the Met. The museum accepted the bust on loan until the Century Association could put it in Central Park, but to the association's dismay, getting Bryant into Central Park even after his death would be a challenge. William Tweed and his successors never forgot about Bryant's remarks. So after Bryant's death in 1878, the park denied the bust one more time. The Century Association said, well, we'll have to revisit this later. In the meantime, the Century Association was flirting with the idea of creating a bigger display than just some old dinky bust. An association member said that the proper way to honor the memory of the dead poet was to erect a statue, at least as imposing as the statue of Burns and Scott. Those are statues that are already sitting in Central Park at this time. Henry A. Oakley, treasurer of the club, agreed, noting in the Times, "I can't see why we should pay more honors to foreign poets than to our own." While funds were being raised for the more grand memorial, the association came up with yet another way of honoring its founder. Where the New York City Crystal Palace had stood behind the reservoir on 6th Ave between 41st and 42nd Street was Reservoir Square. The club had the open space for named Bryant Park in 1884. The Century Association approached the park commissioners again to get the statue put in Central Park, but because of Tweed's connections, they got rejected again. As the magnificent white marble New York Public Library was completed on the site of the old reservoir, the solution became obvious. Bryant's statue should be erected in Bryant Park.
Well, the doy, son.
Sculptor and Century Association member Herbert Adams set to work on the larger-than-life-size figure, while Thomas Hastings designed the pedestal and setting to complement his masterful library. And wow, look at how this puppy turned out. Bryant is depicted in his old age, sitting down underneath an ornate arch. Bryant's gaze is stern, learned, authoritative. The arch is ornate and has Greek-Roman elements similar to those used to commemorate great American figures. This really drives home the point that the Century Association saw Bryant as the first true American poet. The low-relief carvings that juxtapose the 3D deep relief of the form show how the commissioners of the piece wanted to spare no expense in expressing the importance and perceived intricacy of this man. I mean, look at that beard. And for good measure, let's put 2 decorated urns on either side for tired men to take naps under. It's all glam. And for comparison, look at Bryant's buddy, Peter Cooper's memorial in Cooper Triangle. It was no coinkydink that Bryant's memorial dwarfed Cooper's. The association took into account Cooper's existing memorial and purposely one-upped it. William Cullen Bryant's gaze has looked over the park for 108 years now. He has watched the city he loved grow and prosper. It is unlikely any single man will be commemorated in this fashion in the city again. I hope that as you get off at Grand Central, walk 2 blocks to the right, that you get a chance to feel the Century Association's love for this poet.